these Confederates, getting into Port Gibson ahead of them and capturing the bridges over Bayou, Pierre intact. And that's why he organizes and orders the night march. Any questions at this point? If you'd like to take a few moments and get some photographs of Windsor and read the interpreter marker and see an illustration of the house, please do so, and then we'll reboard the bus. Yes, sir.
That's what it looked like, right?
Something, huh? Wow. I can't imagine how many years it took to do it. Because you didn't have what you have today. Look at the work of the floor. I was sitting there earlier, I didn't know whether it was leaves hanging on the bed or if it's actually. Oh my goodness.
Although we do have access rights down to there due to the largesse of the landowner, it's a dirt road, and this bus is too wide for the road itself. But that's the present-day road down to Bruinsburg. The present-day road is not the historic road up which the Union Army marched. Rather, the road up which the Union Army marched from Bruinsburg here to the high ground has been cut by erosions over the years. And when erosion takes off in this area, it takes off like wildfire, and almost overnight creates a hole large enough to fit a house into. As the historic road was chopped, as you see it here, they simply moved the road to its present location, and it too is in danger of being lost here now. But once the Union Army ascended the escarpment and got onto the high ground, Windsor was off to their left. They saw that magnificent edifice and moved in that direction. But once they were informed by the slave of the existence of this alternate road known as the Rodney Road, they moved from Windsor, just as we are doing now, in a southerly direction for about 3 miles, reached Bethl Church, which is at the intersection of the Rodney Road and Bruinsburg Road, and turned on the Rodney Road. And we're going down to that intersection next because Bethl Church is also still standing. This house, the driveway to our left of it is the historic road down to the Bruinsburg landing. We'll see Bethl Church on our left. That's a little turnaround.
You can see, and now the trees, it's the best time. It's the best time to also do one. And some pictures I'll show you later, maybe at dinner.
That sword that was on there. Did you get a chance to look at it anyway?
No, I really did. It's very similar to the sword carried by Captain Wintergreen, who was our resident commissioner of the park from 1899 to 1920. I'm curious if they manufactured about the same make.
Yeah, that's what I was wondering. Who, like, yeah, if there was any markings on there to tell.
I'm sure there are. I just haven't looked at it. It's up at the top. After Windsor burned to the ground in 1890, the Daniel family moved to a place called Reveille, which is just off to our left, my left, you're right. It too is no longer standing today, but they moved just a short distance down the road, and there they lived for the remainder of their lives.
That's what I thought.
Folks, you can see a trace. You can see a trace of the old road right here. You see it on your left? Look how narrow that is. Look how deep the cut is. That's the road over which the Union Army is actually advancing. Here we are at Bethl Church. We'll stop here just a moment. And those of you who may be interested, you can go inside the church. Others, you can walk over and take a look at the old road itself. But as my friend Al Scheller always told me, imagine the worst road you have ever been on in your life. And it is far superior to the best of roads here in Mississippi in the 1860s. And so you'll see an example of an 1860 Mississippi road in just a moment. The Union Army marching in a column, 4 men abreast. The men on the outside of that column are actually rubbing their shoulders up against the road cuts. That's how narrow these roads are. The roads in this lowest soil are also sunk, which provides opportunity after opportunity for ambushing of troops. Let's get out for just a few moments, folks, and just walk around. You can go inside the church, and I'll show some folks the road as well. Conference, they started talking, shouting, band started playing, and as Union soldiers marched on the road off to our side here, many of them took shots at the bell and the steeple. So much for secrets.
Yeah.
This is how they keep warm?
That's it. That's it.
They must be faithful souls.
They must be. Drill down 75, 100, or 150 feet before you actually hit a rock layer. One thing we have to do in Warren County for road construction, building, foundations, things like that, we have to import rocks. We actually import rocks from up in Michigan, Illinois, Ohio, Indiana, bring them down river. But when you're grading these roads today, they'll grade them with a straight cut. And unfortunately, they start sloughing off, and the more they slough off, the farther back they grade, so the roads are actually becoming wider and wider. But this one has not been maintained in a long number of years, as long as I've been here, so it's very much in keeping with its historic appearance. But the Union Army, coming from Windsor Ruins and the landing site at Bruinsburg, came to this point, and here got onto the Rodney Road. This is the historic Rodney Road.
So all the carriages.
How much of this you can follow this road in this condition? It the present-day road, which is just on the other side of the church, actually zigzags back and forth across the historic road. There are nice stretches of the historic road like this intact, several miles worth, in fact.
Wagons and caissons and all of that.
Artillery, limber chest, everything.
Why would it be
so you can see that the Confederates up here, if they were in a position to do so, could easily ambush these Federal troops, and these Federals couldn't possibly turn around at all. So there are wonderful opportunities for ambush that the Confederates just aren't able to take advantage of.
That's just one wagon at a time. I mean, single file.
Correct. Wagons are single file. Men are marching in a column 4 abreast.
So now, tell me again why it's so deep.
Due to the fact this is lowest soil, and so when the roads become muddy, this lowest soil actually is like a talcum powder almost. It begins to dissolve almost instantly when it's wet. And so the wagons will sink. The muddier the roads, the farther the wagons will sink. And so they actually sink down to their axles. And as the horses and mules continue pulling on them, it's actually acting as a grader, grading off the surface of the road. So with each rain, that road gets lower and lower and lower and lower. And so the habit is, once a road gets so low that it's a danger to passerbys, they simply abandon it and move it over 10 feet and start going there. And so oftentimes in Mississippi, you'll see cuts like this, 4 and 5, almost side by side from where they've changed the road over the years. We'll see it again at Champion Hill tomorrow. Yes, it would have. Most of these roads started out as Indian trails. This area was settled by the Choctaw primarily. That's an oak. It's a pin oak.
Funding the schools.
Okay, let's continue on. I'd like to make it a quick advance.
Oh my goodness.
24,000 federal troops.
Back.
Oh.
How did you move that many without people knowing? Yeah. Well, as you say, it wasn't that popular.
Well, with railroads, that's one reason why railroad beds are built on such a thick layer of rock. Oh, okay. Exactly.
That kind of explains why if you got
No fun. Hey, Carl, do you mind to stand down there in the middle of that? Let me take
Leaf.
Leaf! Get them stock quotes. Cannonballs just went up 10%.
Here, you're out of
Like
here.
we say.
He's out of here. Please tell me you didn't fall again.
Fall on the cliff. Hold on.
That wasn't easier grade.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, really.
Okay, Harry.
Maybe we could. I saw that. I saw that. That happened to me. I saw that.
Are you recording? Are you recording?
This is how we are oriented. You know Bayou, Pierre, here in the corner of the map, you see it off to your right. Beautiful view from up here on the Overlook, looking down Bayou, Pierre toward the Mississippi River. Port Gibson is to your left, about 4 miles distance. From Port Gibson, we came out the Bruinsburg Road, ascended the high ground, came to this Y where the Rodney Road and the Bruinsburg Road join. We followed the Bruinsburg Road out across various drainages, past the road where the Confederates retreated back to Grand Gulf, the Andrews House site, you recall, and are now here at the Bayou Pierre Overlook. Let me point out the road network to you. Recall that following the bombardment at Grand Gulf on the 29th of April 1863, Confederate General John Bowen will send Martin Green's brigade of Arkansans out to picket the roads south and west of Port Gibson. Recall there are 4 roads: the Bruinsburg Road, the Rodney Road, here you have the Natchez Road, which is today of course referred to as the Natchez Trace Parkway, and then the Rodney Road, which is US Highway 61. So he's patrolling these 4 roads, keeping an eye out for the feds. But as he learns, as rumors are rife, that the Federals are landing at Bruinsburg, he reasons, and logically so, as a result the Federals can only advance along 1 or 2 roads, the Bruinsburg Road and the Rodney Road. Thus he will concentrate his defense on those 2 roads itself. He'll pull in Green's men from the Natchez and Fayette Road back through Port Gibson and send them on out. Now initially Green will take up a blocking position on both of these roads. But with the arrival of Ed Tracy's brigade of Alabamians late on the night of April 30th, Green will consolidate his forces and move them into a blocking position here on the Rodney Road. Thus, at the outbreak of the battle on May the 1st, we're here at the Overlook where Ed Tracy's Alabama brigade is. You'll see Green's brigade of Arkansans down here on the Confederate left. These 2 units are widely separated by the valley of Centers Creek, which is virtually impassable. As a result, the only communication between these 2 wings and the only method for reinforcement from one wing to the other is to go all the way back to that Y and then out. Now, the Confederates have slightly more than 4,000 troops here on the morning of May the 1st. A small number of men. Coming along the road from Windsor Ruins and Bethel Church here are tens of thousands of Federal soldiers under General John McClernand's command. You recall that shortly after midnight, as the Federals cross Widows Creek and ascend this high ground here, they can see some lights in the distance. That's the Schaefer House, and unfortunately we're not going to be able to get to the Schaefer House today because it's a dirt road just like this for 3 miles, and I don't think the bus is going to make it, and I don't think you folks want to walk that distance today.
No, that's okay.
3 miles in, 3 miles out. So we'll pass the Schaefer House today. But here at the Schaefer House, shortly after midnight, all is deathly quiet out on the skirmish line. General Greene, fearful lest his skirmishers be taken by surprise, rides from his headquarters out past Magnolia Church where his skirmishers are positioned, out to the Schaefer House located here where he has an advanced patrol under a Lieutenant Tisdale keeping watch. As he rides up into the yard of the Schaefer House, the house is aglow with the lanterns as the women of the house are frantically loading a wagon full of household possessions. Greene thinks it's rather humorous, and so he dismounts, walks up to the ladies and says, "Ladies, the enemy can't possibly be here before daylight." And no sooner did he get those words out of his mouth when suddenly there was a volley of musketry, many of the bullets embedding themselves in the Schaefer House or in the wagon of household furniture. Contrary to Greene's admonition, the Yanks had arrived, and the Battle of Port Gibson begins. Immediately, the Schaefer women threw what possessions they had into the wagon, jumped on board, and frantically whipped the poor mule all the way into Port Gibson. Well, the battle will escalate throughout the early morning hours, from midnight to 1 o'clock to 2 o'clock, and at times getting rather intense. But night battles during the Civil War are very rare indeed. It's a problem of command and control over your troops. If you can't see your troops, you can't control them. If you can't see the enemy, you can't fight them. As a result, almost by mutual consent, around 3 o'clock in the morning, a deathly silence once again settles over the field as the soldiers of both armies rest in their arm and try to get a little bit of sleep pending the resumption of the battle with the rising sun. Out here on the Confederate right flank, the Alabamans under Ed Tracy, you recall they arrive about 10 o'clock at night and take up position here astride the Bruinsburg road in this fashion here. They've already placed their artillery and have shotted it to prepare for battle. They're expecting the enemy to come along the Bruinsburg road. But with the sound of firing here shortly after midnight, Tracy will correct his alignment, and rather than be athwart the road, he'll be south of the road and parallel to it. In the very center of his lines are the guns of the Botetourt Virginia Artillery, the only Virginia outfit involved in the Vicksburg Campaign. The Virginians have 4 cannon with them at present, but another section of the battery is hastening to the field of battle and will arrive in time to participate in this fight. 5 o'clock in the morning, the sun begins to rise and the battle will resume. McClernand has arrived on the scene by this time. He has established his headquarters at the Schaefer House. With his binoculars in hand, he scans the entire field. He knows of the Confederates in his front here in the vicinity of Magnolia Church. As he makes his scan with his binoculars, he sees the early morning sunlight reflecting off of rifle barrels, bayonets, and the guns of the Botetourt Artillery here on the Bruinsburg Road, and realizes he is going to have to fight a two-front battle. This force is of unknown strength, but he must contend with it lest they advance along this plantation road and move into his rear. That plantation road, by the way, is just off to your left around that corner. McClernand will send 1 division down this plantation road to contest the Confederates here on the Bruinsburg Road. The main Federal thrust is going to be along the Rodney Road toward Magnolia Church, and that's where McClernand will send the bulk of his command. We'll talk more about this fighting in just a moment. Here on the Bruinsburg Road, Ed Tracy and his Alabamians are very tired. After all, they have covered 30 miles in 2 days. They've crossed the Big Black River, and they have moved into position here just at 10 o'clock at night. And with only about 2 hours of sleep, are awakened by the sounds of battle at midnight. They will be up virtually the entire night, just catching a few winks of sleep. They are very tired, but are prepared and anxious for the battle. Early in the morning, they see this Union division deploying in the line of battle at the Schaefer House, moving astride the Plantation Road, advancing toward their position. As a member of the Virginia Battery wrote, it was a grim sight, yet one that we had been accustomed to from many hard-fought fields. Across the fields they came in magnificent array, with their battle flags blowing in the breeze and their bayonets glistening in the sunlight above them. The Virginia Battery will open fire to contest the advance. Unfortunately for the Virginians, the Federals dropped from rifle guns in the vicinity of the Schaefer House and opened fire at long range. Although the Union troops have rifle guns, the Virginians have pre-sighted their own and at maximum range are right on target. They will disable one of the Rodman rifles and inflict casualties on the gun crew at this location, but it doesn't take the Feds long to get the range of the Virginia Battery. In just a short period of time, these Virginians are experiencing a very hot fire. The Virginians begin going down at an alarming rate. So do the battery horses. The commander of the battery at this stage is Sergeant Francis Aubenchain. Aubenchain is sent by the commander of the battery to General Tracy, requesting that the caissons be run to the rear for safety and that the main infantry line open fire to take off pressure from the Virginians. But Tracy, not willing to open up with his main line and thus reveal not only his position but the weakness of his position, denies the request. A second time, Aubenchain will be sent to Tracy requesting that the caissons be run to the rear. A second time, he is denied. Finally, as the Union sharpshooters move into position and start picking off the gunners one by one, Aubenchain is sent yet a third time to Tracy with the same request. Aubenchain years later would write, as he sat on horseback talking with the general, suddenly there was a dull thud. The general fell from his horse and in falling cried, "Oh Lord." He was dead when I stooped to him. Ed Tracy becomes the first of 5 Confederate generals who will die during the course of this campaign. His brigade falls under the command now of its senior Colonel Isham Garrett, who ironically will be one of the other Confederate generals to die during the course of this campaign as he's elevated in rank during the course of the Vicksburg operations. Garrett will immediately order the caissons run to the rear. He'll open up with his main line contesting the advance. But the Federals are just too powerful. They are advancing in overwhelming numbers. Coming down this road is a Union division led by General Peter Osterhaus, normally a very aggressive, hard-hitting officer, a Prussian who had fled from Prussia in the 1840s, enlisted in the Army of the United States. He is a brigadier general at this point in time. Fiery and aggressive soldier, but here at Port Gibson, he doesn't act with his customary vigor. He is stymied by the terrain features in this area. He is confused by the maze of ridges and the dense vegetation down in these ravines. As a result, his advance is slow and methodical, but steady nonetheless. As the morning hours continue to unfold, and Osterhaus's division nears the Confederate line, the Federals will cross this road off to your right, sweep down into the valley of Bayou Pierre, as you can see here, working their way around the bayou and the base of this hill directly behind us here now. They'll start ascending the rise, outflanking the Confederates at this point. The Confederates have no recourse but to abandon this position and begin a slow retrograde on their right flank. And so by late morning, the Federals have driven the Confederates from this position. The Confederates have fallen back to the next ridgeline on your left. The Union advance, however, continues inexorably, as you can see, as Osterhaus's men take possession of this ridgeline, move down into the next ravine, and start ascending the rise and driving the Confederates from ridgeline to ridgeline to ridgeline. It's now early afternoon, by which time the Confederates out here on the right flank will be somewhat reinforced. The morning fight has gone against the Confederates over in the vicinity of the Schaefer House. Green's brigade is badly mauled and driven from the field. As Green's brigade retreats, fortunately fresh units are arriving. William Baldwin, as well as Francis Cockrell coming in from Grand Gulf. And with those 2 fresh brigades, John Bowen will reestablish his line of defense in this area. He will inform General Greene to reform on the march
and go to the assistance of Colonel Garrett and the Alabamians. Green's troops will arrive early in the afternoon, as you can see here, extending the Confederate line. But even with this reinforcements, the Confederates are no match for the overwhelming numbers of Federal troops that are advancing in this area. The Confederates will continue to fall back from ridge line to ridge line. And finally, late in the afternoon, they will be compelled to yield the field. And so Green's brigade, as well as Garrett's brigade of Alabamians, will retire from the field along the direct road to Grand Gulf. Let's go back to the other side of the battlefield for just a few moments, if we may. While Colonel Garrett is fighting here, a slow, delaying action and falling back in front of the Federal advance, over on the Bruinsburg Road, the Rodney Road, you can see the Federals under McClernand. They have taken possession of the Schaefer House and are pushing steadily down the Rodney Road. They will gain control of Magnolia Church and the Foster House area and drive toward the Confederate line. Green, very early on here in the morning, will send a messenger all the way back here to this Y and out to General Tracy initially, saying, "I cannot hold my position much longer unless reinforced. Send me 1 regiment plus a battery, a section of the Virginia Battery." Well, 1 section of the Virginia Battery and 1 regiment of Alabamians will march 3 miles down this road to the Y, 3 miles out this leg, and arrive just as the Federals are launching their final phase of the attack. The 2 guns of the Virginia Battery will be overrun and captured by the Federals, and Green's entire line will be driven from the field. These men have been roughly handled this morning. Unaccustomed to that type of handling, they began to throw their weapons aside, their accoutrements, and run pell-mell back through the woods. As they are doing so, Bowen thankfully is bringing fresh troops onto the field of battle. Realizing that his troops here were no match for the Federals in terms of numbers, early in the morning he had sent messengers out to find Ed Tracy, to find William Baldwin and hasten him to the battlefield. He has also sent a message to Grand Gulf to Colonel Cockrell to come to the battlefield with all possible speed. These 2 divisions, hastening to the battlefield, although very tired from their vigorous march, will move out from Fort Gibson to that Y, down the Rodney Road and into position here in the vicinity of White and Irwin branches of Willow Creek. There they will take up a strong defensive position. Now Bowen has learned something from the fight here at Fort Gibson. He realizes with these ridge tops cleared and the ravines heavily wooded that this has given the Union artillery quite an advantage, because the Union artillery is far more numerous, it's far more powerful, especially with rifled guns. To safeguard his men, rather than keep them up on the ridge top, which is a normal defensive position, he moves these troops down actually into the creek beds themselves, where the dense vegetation of cane and vine conceals his men and gives them advantage. Having gained control of this area early in the morning, there's a pause in the fighting. McClernand will take the moment to congratulate his troops. He is on a stump praising their actions at Fort Gibson when up rides Illinois Governor Richard Yates, who has been accompanying these troops throughout this campaign. Never one to lose an opportunity to talk to the voters. Richard Yates also gets up on the stump and starts campaigning for re-election. Well, here you have Yates and McClernand, who has political ambitions of his own after the war, campaigning for office when up rides General Grant, the Army commander, who has hastened all the way from Bruinsburg to the field of battle to give personal direction to the troops. Grant can see ample evidence of the Union victory and the demoralization of the Confederates after all the fields are strewn with cast aside accoutrements and weapons. He walks up to General McClernand, and rather than reprimand the general for the victory he has won, he simply suggests, "General, don't you think it's a good idea to press the enemy?" To which McClernand replies, "Yes, quite so, quite so." And so off the stump he goes. He reforms his troops and will launch an additional attack in the afternoon. Now, in the afternoon of May the 1st of 1863, his forces regrouped and reinforced by fresh arrivals coming in from Bruinsburg, McClernand has an overwhelming mass of troops, as you can see here, advancing along the Rodney Road. He actually has far more men than he can suitably use in this area. But McClernand is a puncher. He throws in absolutely everything he has. He never holds back a reserve for any contingency whatsoever. You can see with the massive power he has here, that his line extending to the left and to the right is not only bringing great pressure on the Confederate front, but he's also outflanking him on either side. Bowen realizes there's not much chance here unless he acts aggressively and with vigor. Bowen will order Colonel Cockrell's brigade of Missourians to move into the woods along White and Irwin branches of Willow Creek. Try to find the enemy's flank, because if you don't find that flank and stop it, if the Federals continue extending that line, what's going to happen? They're going to find the Natchez Road or the Fayette Road and advance into Port Gibson behind the Confederates, gaining control of the town and bagging the entire Confederate force. Okay. As a result, it's important to stave this flanking movement. Yes, sir?
That's passable land, you're saying.
This here is passable land. It's difficult terrain, but it's passable land. This here is impassable land, okay? So Cockrell will move down the valley of White and Irwin branches and move into position. In the afternoon, mid-afternoon, he will launch a vicious counterattack, which finds the Federal flank and begins rolling it up. But as you roll up this flank, what's happening with the enemy? They're getting denser and denser and more dense, aren't they? As a result, they're able to finally slow and stop Cockrell's advance. Simply deploy additional troops out on the line here, outflank Cockrell, and press the advantage. Cockrell has no recourse but to fall back. And with this Confederate counterattack checked and now being driven from the field, Bowen realizes the day is lost. He sends Pemberton a telegraphic message around 5 o'clock in the afternoon saying, "I hope to hold my lines until darkness enables me to withdraw in good order. Want of ammunition is one of the main reasons for our defeat. The men act nobly, but the odds are overwhelming," and indeed they certainly were. Only 15 minutes later, he sends a second message to Pemberton saying, "I cannot hold any longer. I am falling back across Bayou Pierre." And so Bowen hopes to withdraw his units in good order. He will first of all order Colonel Cockrell to fall back from the field, then Baldwin. The idea is for all the troops to take the Grand Gulf Road back to that Confederate bastion where they can replenish their munitions, have food supplies available for them, and have a strong defensive position with the heavy ordnance that is available at Grand Gulf. The two brigades out here on the Confederate right, Garrett and Greene, will successfully evacuate the field via the Grand Gulf Road. By the time Cockrell's men reach it, the Federals are in hot pursuit. And before William Baldwin, the last Confederate brigade to leave this field, can do so, the Federals have already captured the Grand Gulf Road. With the avenue of escape cut off here, Baldwin has no recourse but to fall back through the town of Port Gibson, which he does so, and under cover of darkness, he pushes through the city streets, crosses over Bayou Pierre, and sets fire to the suspension bridge at that point. By this time, darkness has completely enveloped the fields. Grant is satisfied with his victory at this point. Rather than press the attack in the darkness, he simply pulls his troops back to where the morning fight began and bivouacs for the night. Early on the morning of May 2nd, however, his troops are in rapid pursuit, chasing the Confederates through the town of Port Gibson and down along the Grand Gulf Road. On May the 2nd, as Grant himself enters the town of Port Gibson, he sees the suspension bridge is on fire and cannot be used. Federals will immediately begin bridging the stream in this area. But by bridging a stream, it's very time consuming, and Grant is anxious to keep the Confederates on the run. And so he will order one brigade of Federal troops to find a ford over in this area and cross over the stream and continue the pursuit. By day's end, the bridge is built, the troops are pushing through Port Gibson, and on May the 2nd, the Federals hear the boom, the dull booms over at Grand Gulf, indicating that the Confederates have blown their magazines and are evacuating the area. Grant will thus ride on to Grand Gulf the next day. There, as he'll tell you, he had a bath and a fresh change of clothing for the first time in more than a month. But the victory here at Port Gibson on May 1st is highly significant in the fact that it not only secures Grant's beachhead on Mississippi soil, but it forces the Confederate evacuation of Grand Gulf, that good all-weather landing, which will provide the Federals with a springboard for further invasion of the Magnolia State. They will convert Grand Gulf into their base of operations for the inland phase of the campaign, and over the next 17 days, in what is often referred to as the Blitzkrieg of the Vicksburg Campaign, Grant's army will drive deep into the state, meeting and overcoming Confederate resistance at Port Gibson on May the 1st, Raymond on May the 12th. Jackson 2 days later will fall into Federal hands. With the capital of Mississippi in his hands, Grant will neutralize the capital, rendering it useless militarily, and then turn west toward his objective Vicksburg, from whence we came today. And en route between Jackson and Vicksburg, he will overwhelm Confederate forces at Champion Hill on May the 16th, and again at the Big Black River Bridge on May the 17th, and close the back door to Vicksburg, and give him opportunity for successful siege operations. But the campaign, as we can see, is off to a wonderful start for the Federals, and this battle will set the tone for the campaign to come. As you might well imagine, the Union forces, having gained victory here at Port Gibson on May 1st, are now supremely confident in their ability to gain victory, even though they are operating deep in the enemy country, facing an enemy which, if consolidated, would be numerically superior to them, operating on roads that they are not familiar with, yet they are supremely confident and will carry that confidence with them throughout this campaign. This also sets the tenor for events for the Confederates. Pemberton, as you recall, a very indecisive man by nature, distrusted by many men in the ranks, the defeat here at Port Gibson will only enhance the distrust that the Confederate soldiers have for their commanding general. He must be incompetent, a traitor perhaps. These rumors will continue to grow and become widespread throughout the army as they face defeat after defeat in this campaign. But on May 1st, John Pemberton will wire the authorities in Richmond, informing them of the defeat here at Port Gibson, and tells them the dire news that if the enemy is left unchecked, will isolate both Port Hudson and Vicksburg. When this news is received in Richmond, you can imagine the shock of horror that races through the veins of Jefferson Davis and his leading subordinate officers, both military and civilian authorities. Something must be done to salvage this rapidly deteriorating situation in Mississippi. Otherwise, calamity awaits the Confederacy. Because if the Mississippi River is lost, the Confederacy will be split in two. And now, wrapped in the coils of the giant anaconda, the Southern Confederacy will slowly be strangled into submission. With news of defeat here at Port Gibson on May the 1st, Jefferson Davis will immediately place into operation activities that he hopes will salvage the situation. He will order Confederate General Joseph E. Johnston to make haste to Mississippi and take command of all forces in the field. His orders are to salvage the situation and save Mississippi, keep control of the Mississippi River. And we'll talk more about Joe Johnston over the next day as we look at the battlefields at Raymond, Jackson, Champion Hill, and so on. Before we leave this site here, are there any questions anybody would like to ask relative to the Battle of Port Gibson? Yes, sir.
It doesn't look like there was much of a chance for Bowen or any of them to do anything other than what...
At this stage of the game, there's not a great deal. The opportunity for the Confederates to do something against the Federals is when Grant is caught with one boot on Louisiana soil and one boot on Mississippi soil. If they can catch the Federals in such a situation, it's a possibility they can knock the boot that's in Mississippi back into the river. What provides Grant the opportunity to do this is the United States Navy. You cannot overemphasize the significant role that the Navy plays here at Vicksburg. That superiority of naval power on these inland waters gives the Federals the opportunity to move almost at will anywhere there is water. you see by moving beyond the guns of of Grand Gulf to the south, Bowen realizes the Federals are going to cross somewhere below him, but he cannot afford to move his troops too far south of Grand Gulf lest the Navy just bring these troops back upriver and capture Grand Gulf. And so he's very limited in his reaction to Grant's crossing. He cannot afford to go as far south as Rodney, and so he goes as far south as he feels comfortable with, that will give him an opportunity to pull these troops back if need be. And so the Federals will be able to land unopposed. Unopposed. Yes, sir.
The cavalry, I think you mentioned some of the cavalry was pulled out of this area.
Correct.
So
the cavalry that is in this area has been pulled out to chase Grierson's raiders. These are some of the forces that will form that roadblock in front of Grierson on April 29th. They will continue chasing Grierson as he heads south toward the Louisiana state line. And it's not until the Battle of Port Gibson and news of the defeat of John Bowen that Pemberton calls that cavalry back. It is too late to be of any service here whatsoever.
Terry,
Ma'am.
what is Crocker and all of this?
Where's Crocker?
Yes.
Crocker's men form, they are part of the 17th Union Army Corps. The 17th Corps on April 30th is on the other side of the river. One division of McPherson's command will cross on April 30th. That is John Smith's division. John Smith's division will cross the river. Crocker will come later. As a result, Crocker's men, only a few regiments of his command, will see even limited action here at Port Gibson. They will be crossing the river and hastening over that long 13-mile road from the area of Bethl Church to the Schaefer House. So they won't see any action here for all intents and purposes. Crocker's division will not get heavily engaged until the Battle of Raymond on May the 12th. They'll be again engaged at Jackson on the 14th, and then at Champion Hill on the 16th. Yes, ma'am. Yes, sir.
Where was Tracy when he was killed?
Where's Ed Tracy? Tracy's in the vicinity of the Andrews House, which is down the road here near where that lumber yard is. As we drive back down along this road, I'll point out where the Andrews House site was once again. Now, the guns of the Botetourt, Virginia artillery were directly in the center of the Confederate line, and so they're only about 150, 200 yards from where Tracy's headquarters were. So Tracy's pretty close up to the front line at his headquarters. But he's killed there around 7:30 in the morning on May the 1st. His body initially will be taken back to the Andrews House where he's pronounced dead. Simply to prevent its capture by the Federals, it's taken into Port Gibson and placed in that home I pointed out to you. With the defeat of the Confederate forces here on May 1st and the evacuation of the Port Gibson area, the Confederates will take Tracy's body with them, send it back to Vicksburg. There it is placed in a coffin, placed on board train, and sent to Alabama. And it's on one of the last trains that gets out of Vicksburg prior to the siege. But it makes it back to Alabama safely, and Ed Tracy is buried there today. Now his successor in command of this brigade, Colonel Isham Garrett. Garrett will command the brigade here at Port Gibson. But within just a matter of days, he will be superseded in command of this brigade by Brigadier General Stephen D. Lee. Lee, many of you will recall, had served at Antietam. He commanded a battalion of artillery right there at Bethl Church area. For his actions at Antietam, he was elevated to Brigadier General. But there were just no openings for a Brigadier General in the Army of Northern Virginia at that time, and so Lee is sent out west. He will command a brigade of Louisianians in the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou in December of 1862, and here finally in May be given command of the Alabama Brigade, which he will lead throughout the duration of this campaign. Garrett, on the other hand, will be promoted to Brigadier General because his name does go in for nomination for his actions here at Port Gibson. He will be confirmed by the Senate. That notification will arrive in Vicksburg just a few days after he was killed. So he's killed by a Union sharpshooter on June the 17th in the fort that now bears his name. And as all of you who know Ed Bars, you've heard him say it a million times, you never wanted a fort named after you. And so Garrett was killed before he's notified he had been elevated to Brigadier General. But the bust of Garrett in the park shows him with the rank of Brigadier General.
Does that become Pettis' brigade?
Does that become Pettis's brigade? Yes, it does, because Ed Pettis is colonel of one of the outfits at that point in time. We'll talk about Ed Pettis tomorrow, in fact. And Ed Pettis is the brother of the Mississippi War Governor, John J. Pettis. John Pettis was a real fiery, anxious to take the state out of the Union. His brother Ed was a little milder in his sentiments, but Ed Pettis, after the war, would go on to become a United States Senator from Alabama. Yes, sir.
Casualties?
Casualties here at Port Gibson, relatively light by Civil War standards, especially when you compare it to some of the actions in the East. Here at Port Gibson, the two sides will suffer about 800 casualties apiece. What accounts for that? First of all, the low number of troops engaged in this battle. Maximum number, Grant has 24,000 men, not all of whom are engaged at any one time. The Confederates, by the end of the day, have about 8,000 men, but for the bulk of the fight, there are only about 4,500 Confederates on this field. And so due to the paucity of troops, casualties are light. Due to this terrain and the dense growth of vegetation, casualties are at a minimum. Due to the limited role of artillery in this battle, casualties are at a minimum, but about 800 on either side. Other questions? Sir?
When you came back with a second request to unlimber and move the case on back,
You're referring to Francis Obenchain of the Virginia Battery.
and I mean, a second request being sort of passed by, isn't that kind of odd?
Well, it is, but you must understand Ed Tracy's position. First of all, his men are very tired after their long, grueling march from Vicksburg. They've only been in position for 2 hours when suddenly the battle opens up. Thus, they are deprived of sleep for the most part that night. So these guys have been on the road for 48 hours, and now, with only 2 hours of sleep, are expected to fight a battle. His line is spread very, very thin. There's been a lot of straggling on this march from Vicksburg, so his brigade is very much under strength. They are covering a very broad front. Not only is there this tremendous gap between Tracy and Greene, thanks to the impenetrable valley of Center's Creek, but there's also gaps between his various regiments. And he does not want the enemy to discern what the true nature of events are on his front. Thus, by opening fire, the enemy can tell exactly what is the length of his line. They could tell by the firepower virtually what number of men he has, and they could tell by firing from here and here and here that there are gaps in his line, directing them where to concentrate their advance. Tracy does not want to give this important information away, so he denies that second request. Only when the Federals close enough where their men down in these ravines are picking off the gunners one at a time and their horses as well, does Tracy finally acquiesce and open with his main line.
Only to die.
Only to die, exactly. Exactly. We have some wonderful letters on file from Lieutenant Francis Obenchain. He was a young man during the course of the Battle of Port Gibson. It made quite an impression on him. And so we have quite a lengthy stack of letters from the sergeant, later elevated to lieutenant, relative to the battle at Port Gibson. I quote him in my book my 2 books on the Vicksburg Campaign, some wonderful materials there. But he talks about the incoming shells disabling the Confederate guns. He talks about the men who are killed, in what order they are killed, what type of wounds they sustained. He talks about the 2 lieutenants of the 2 sections that are down here by the Andrews house, Lieutenants William Peter and James Dottat, how they were standing side by side. Peters, being a much older man, a veteran of the Mexican War, turned to Dottat and said, "This is hot around here." And Dottat simply replied, "Yes, it is," when suddenly a shell came in and decapitated both men. Well, folks, if there's no further questions here, let's reboard the bus. We may have enough time to take you into Port Gibson and stop by Wintergreen Cemetery and show you the graves of Earl Van Dorn and Ben Tompkins.
Here on our right in just a moment. Here it is. You can follow that plantation road all the way to the Schaefer house today. But we'll go into Port Gibson, look at the Wintergreen Cemetery, and then be on our way back to Vicksburg. I was hoping we might have enough time this afternoon to follow a portion of the inland campaign. We won't be able to today, so we can get you back in time to wash up and rest for a few moments before your dinner tonight. Tomorrow morning, however, we will take up with a portion of the inland campaign From Vicksburg, we'll travel down Mississippi Highway 27 until we intersect the Port Gibson Road, which was the main axis of advance of the Federal Army during the inland phase of the campaign, and we'll follow the route from there to Raymond Battlefield, then to Champion Hill, and to Big Black River Bridge, all tomorrow. Now tomorrow, it's my understanding, the rain is supposed to move out of the area. There will be some walking tomorrow, especially when we get to Champion Hill Battlefield. It will be necessary for those of you interested to walk from the crossroads area up about 800 yards of a muddy road to the crest of Champion Hill, and then back, of course, so just be forewarned about that. This is the area of the Andrews house where this lumber yard now stands. This next road coming in from your left is the avenue of retreat that Garrett's Brigade and Green's Brigade took to Grand Gulf. You'll see it coming in just a moment. Today it just forms a driveway for a house, but you can follow traces of that road all the way back to Bayou Pierre. That's it right there. On May the 1st, as the setting sun was casting lurid shadows over the field, a young 12-year-old boy by the name of Fred Grant arrived on the battlefield in search of his father, the Army Commander Ulysses. Young Fred, his first time on the field of battle, was sickened by the sights that greeted his eyes. He did, however, get involved in removing some of the wounded from the battlefield and taking them back to the hospitals. And there he listened to the screams of the soldiers and witnessed amputations. He said he was the most woe-begone 12-year-old in America that day, just sickened by the sights. But he would become a battle-hardened veteran here during the course of the Vicksburg Campaign, witnessing the battles throughout this operation, even being wounded at the Battle of Big Black River Bridge. But he left a delightful account entitled "What a Boy Saw" during the Vicksburg Campaign. With victory behind him on May 1st, Grant is very pleased to have secured his landing area. Throughout the rest of May the 1st, Union troops would continue being ferried across the river, and finally on May 2nd, Grant would push forward and occupy the town of Port Gibson. You recall that the Union soldiers in their journals and letters wrote how they wound along the road here to the high ground and began descending into the town of Port Gibson, how the spires of the churches could be seen above this cloud of blue thanks to the chinaberry trees that line the streets of Port Gibson. They would then occupy the town itself, try to put out the fire that had engulfed the suspension bridge, but were unable to do so, and so they would spend the balance of the day gathering up supplies that were in Port Gibson that the Confederates had evacuated and building a bridge over Bayou Pierre. Once the bridge was in position, they would cross the bayou and push hard to the line of the Big Black River in hopes of catching Confederate General Bowen and his command while still south of the Big Black River, where hopefully that natural barrier would pin them in and they could destroy Bowen's division in detail. But Bowen will be able to cross the Big Black on May the 3rd at Hankinson's Ferry. The Federals will actually be in such hot pursuit that they will capture the bridge intact and actually cross a portion of their command that day. But rather than take the direct road to Vicksburg from this point, Grant, who has a keen eye for topography, realized that by crossing the Big Black River on the most direct road to Vicksburg would place his army in a very narrow triangle of land, with the Mississippi River on his left, the Big Black River on his right and rear. And as we saw driving down here, there's ridge line after ridge line after ridge line between here and Vicksburg that would provide Confederate John Pemberton with one strong defensive position after another. What is Grant's objective after crossing the river? It's not to capture Vicksburg immediately. His first objective after crossing this river is to sever that rail line that links Vicksburg with Jackson. Now, although that was the target of Grierson's raid, as we know, Grierson succeeded in cutting that line. Grant is not aware of this. There's been no communication between Grierson and federal authorities in the Memphis area. There will be no communication between Grierson and federal authorities until he rides into Baton Rouge on May the 2nd. Not wishing to take any chances, Grant's first objective has to be that railroad. Sever that vital line of supply and communication that links Vicksburg with Jackson and via Jackson points elsewhere in the Confederacy. Cut off his enemy, and then he could kill him. So cut him off and kill him. So once he crosses this river, his objective has to be that railroad. And so for the next several days, rather than march straight north onto Vicksburg, he will head his army in a northeasterly direction, keeping Bayou Pierre on his right, the Big Black River to his left, using those natural barriers to safeguard his flanks and penetrate deep into the interior of Mississippi. It is a brilliant move.
That was Ed Barnes.
Oh,
That was our dear friend Ed, going with the Smithsonian Associates.
Move your legs down.
He's probably saying, there's Winter. What's he doing late in the battlefield so early?
His 80th birthday thing is coming. It's going to be, he's going to be at the Civil War College in Gettysburg. And they have this campaign. They want everybody to send birthday cards to Carlisle.
I need to do that. I got a note of that.
Yeah.
I misplaced it on my desk.
Well, give me the email. I'll email you the address because I'm having everybody send it.
Good,
Like,
'cause I do want to send it.
yeah, they really want to give it a big thing.
Big to do.
You gotta remember when we gotta read these things now. Remember that.
We should get to that right around
Known as Church Street for obvious reasons due to the conglomeration of churches of various denominations. We're going to turn south on Church Street, take it to the south end of town and out to Wintergreen Cemetery. Not to be confused with Evergreen Cemetery in Gettysburg.
Where's Gettysburg? Way over there.
Where's Gettysburg? In Mississippi?
Is Gettysburg in Mississippi?
Remember when that woman?
It's in Nebraska.
When that woman said?
Oh, yeah. We were in the park one day and this lady had her kids climbing up on it. And they tried to be like, oh, he was from Kentucky and she makes all the paths.
I don't think the bus can go in up here and get up to the gate. Turn, let us off there. Turn the bus around.
Gibson.
Folks, again, here you see some of the beautiful homes in Port Gibson, many antebellum and Victorian age homes. The home of Earl Van Dorn is on the hillside off to your right over there. We can't see it from this location. It's known as the Hill, and it was built by the general's father, Peter Van Dorn. It's a beautiful home that has recently been restored. If we had more time today, I'd make arrangements to get you in there and let you see the place. But it is a beautiful home up on the hill to your right. After the general was killed, of course, his body was brought back here to Port Gibson for burial, and he is buried next to his father. So we're going to get out here and take a quick walk through the cemetery. I'll point out some of the notables who are buried here from the Civil War era, and after we exit the gate, George will have our bus turned around for us to head back to Vicksburg.
Humphreys also has a very nice portrait of himself in Confederate uniform in the governor's mansion in the Hall of Governors as he went on to serve as governor of Mississippi shortly after the Civil War. Let's continue on along this way.
It just says Ben Humphrey. I find that odd. What? I'll mention his name as his Confederate.
Beach Club of Claiborne County. That's a real tongue twister. Well, in 1844, I think it was, this man was gravely ill, not expected to live much longer, but he was determined to live to cast his dying vote for Henry Clay and the Whig ticket. And so his fellow members of the Clay Club of Claiborne County placed this man on a stretcher, carried him to the polls where he cast his vote for Henry Clay and promptly died. And so the members of the Clay Club of Claiborne County lovingly buried the man here and erected a stone in his honor.
Broken by a man.
He would have been very disappointed to find out Clay didn't win.
Yeah, there was some ice on the road.
Ethelbert was a real skin flint. Although William was his brother, the general's widow was left virtually destitute. She could not afford a headstone for her husband. So she requested that Ethelbert put up a headstone for William Barksdale, and Ethelbert refused. Absolutely refused. To his dying day, refused to pay for a headstone for his brother. After all, that's the family's business, not my responsibility. Consequently, when the request was made to move the body to Yazoo City, Mrs. Barksdale certainly couldn't afford to pay for the disinterment and the removal of the body, and Ethelbert sure wasn't going to pay for it, so I think he's still there. I just stopped here to point out this grave of Fred Claiborne. Fred Claiborne, who is a member of the founding family of Claiborne County, Mississippi, was up in Maryland at the outbreak of the American Civil War. Rather than race back to Mississippi and join the Army, he enlisted in Maryland in what became known as the 3rd Maryland Artillery. He rose up to become captain of that battery, and lo and behold, it was the only Maryland Confederate unit involved in the Vicksburg operations. He is actually killed during the siege of Vicksburg, was initially interred near where he fell at Vicksburg, and after the siege his family retrieved his body and brought it home here for burial. That's Fred Claiborne, captain of the 3rd Maryland Battery. Then off to your left, of course, are the graves of the Confederate soldiers who died in the Battle of Port Gibson. Initially there were small stones erected by the UDC. Most of those have been replaced by relatively newer stones erected by the Veterans Administration. Let's go down over this way, buddy. I know it goes farther north, but